the reason that I want to do these
Okay.
conversations is because I personally, right, as a white person, have learned a ton from you, and I've
Mm-hmm.
learned a ton from some other
Okay.
people that I want to
Yeah.
interview. And
Yeah.
and the biggest thing that I think that we as white people don't understand, or like just begin to understand, just to like step into this, is that
Mm-hmm.
I live in a totally different reality than you do, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
experience the
That's the
world
thing.
in a totally different way. And
Yeah.
usually the place that most Facebook conversations devolve is when
Mhm.
white people try to apply their life experience to a
Yeah.
person of color's life experience.
Yeah.
And they try
Well,
and
I got
go,
pulled over.
right, yeah, no, I get pulled over all the
And they
time, or
didn't kill me.
I'm respectable and then they respect me, or,
Yeah, yeah. And
right?
then you have these subtle things like politics of respectability, right?
Right,
Why do you act like if we pull our pants up mystically, magically, the world is gonna morph and we're gonna live in the reality that you live in? But
right,
no, it doesn't
right,
matter how we look or how we're dressed or how we're not dressed. It's the
right,
same kind of outcome. But
right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that there are some really solid, just basic things in white people world that are things like, if you obey the law, you don't get in trouble. If you
Yes,
are where you're supposed to
yeah,
be, nobody
right,
bothers you. Like there's
right.
all of these ideas. And so the only people that you see generally in white culture who are getting in trouble
Yeah,
are getting in trouble
yeah.
because they did something wrong, right? And so for white people, like we come from that, like that's our water. That's the water that we swim in. That's what we believe to be true. And so,
And often you have to do something extreme, right?
yeah,
Like
right,
serial kill 25 people, right?
right,
You got to, and then it's just chalked up as being the individual with mental health problems.
right,
It's not chalked up as being
right,
a systemic sickness in the collective mind.
right.
It's
Yes.
passed off as an individuated anomaly, right?
Yeah. It's a
But
one-off and
when,
it's behavior
but when,
based. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yes,
think like
yes. Mhm,
that's what we expect then from people of color. And so a lot of
mhm,
times, like white people will hear a story of someone dying at the hands of police, and they will
mhm.
apply that story to their context. And so the reason that I
Yes.
really want to do these interviews is because it wasn't until I started to listen that I started to understand, right? I can't possibly know what it is
Yeah.
to live as you live unless I let you tell me. And a lot of times, like one of the values of Christian white culture is this idea of like unity, and like why do we even need to talk about race? Like I don't see people that are different than me. Why can't we all be
I
human?
know.
And I guess the
Right.
thing that really kicked me in questions
Mhm.
like that was like, if you're asked, white people ask questions in two different ways, right? Like a white person can ask an ignorant question that they don't know the answer to and
Mhm.
want an answer, or
Mhm.
white people can ask a leading question that they have a presumption about, and they're asking it to shut the conversation down, which
Yes.
is generally what happens in Facebook land, right?
Mm.
So what
Yeah.
I really want this to be is I would like to teach white people how to listen and how to
Yeah.
ask, even like you're somebody who I can ask really stupid questions to, and because you know that I'm not trying to shut you down, but I really want to learn,
Mhm.
you're patient and you teach me.
Mhm.
And I want these
Mhm.
conversations to be a space where white people learn how to ask questions that they're actually looking for an answer to, and not just trying to pretend
Yeah.
that they're asking, right? So one of
Right.
the
Right. Which is huge.
So one of the things that I guess you and I had talked before we started this, just about like starting out with toe in the water, right? Like this is the first racial incident that I haven't been conflicted about. I think there are a lot of people that are not as conflicted about this because it
Yeah.
didn't involve a police officer, right? And so you have
Mm.
there's the ability to go, those were bad white people, that did something
Yes.
to a good
Yeah.
Black person.
Yeah.
And I can be
And as so
upset.
long as I'm not rednecking around with a gun,
Right.
then I'm in the clear.
Yeah. I
Right?
can be
Yeah.
upset with those white people. And I can say that's
Mm-hmm.
not right. And I can be upset
Mm-hmm.
with the DA in this situation who happens to be a woman, so we can go ahead and go on that part too, right? But I can be mad at her. I can be mad at the system of the good old boys, and I can still live in a context where justice is generally served. And I can live in a context where our system is fair, except for
Yeah.
every once in a while. And I think that what I started to
Except for
learn,
these outlying cases.
yeah, the outliers. And the only reason that they get any kind of press is because the media just really wants to race bait, right? Like we have this whole narrative built
Yeah. Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
this is rare, and really what happens more is Black people kill Black people, but we don't want to care about that because we want to villainize white people. There's all of these things, right?
Yeah.
All of which are the questions that I'm talking about that aren't intended to be questions. I'm not asking you that question because I want to know. I'm asking you that question because I want you to stop talking because you're making me uncomfortable. And so, so that's kind of where I want to start, is like toe in the water with this.
Okay.
You were so transparent with me yesterday about how you felt about this. And I think all of us are appalled, right? We're all appalled at this. Like even the white people that have never cared about this before are like, this isn't okay.
They found a nerve somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But for you, it's different. And I would love to let you talk about why this is different for you. Let you talk about what it's like for your brothers and for you. And again, kind of like going from talking to me like I have never even given the thought that maybe the justice system is jacked, or that maybe there's a different set of rules for you than for me, and really like explaining from the ground up, like, how does this work and why is it different for you, and why can't I just pretend that there's not color? Like if I'm not racist, like if I don't hate Black people outright, why do I have to constantly think about this? And I'm not asking that to say, don't tell me. I'm asking that, please tell me why that's not the case, you know?
Okay, so let me just unpack this question a little bit. So first off, to even engage in this, we have to start with acknowledging where you and I are sitting at today. You know, one, we have a personal relationship, right? So there's a history there. There's mutual trust and respect that has been built over the years and time spent, at caring, right? And there's trust for that. So that's kind of the first step in trying to seek out knowledge to unravel this, right? So okay. And then, the second, where kind of the main component of where you and I are sitting at today is that recognize that we are sitting on land that was stolen. So right now, in 2020, right now, we are sitting in land that was taken by force, military force mostly, from people who have been here since, they have their stories on how long that they've been here. And so really what you're seeing is it's just there's cyclical patterns in the way that certain bodies are treated on this planet and in this country and in this region and in this state and in this area.
So you're saying that it's not just that the land was stolen all those years ago and I should get over that. You're saying that's still happening.
Yes. Yeah. It's still occupied. Right. There's no move towards restoring anybody anywhere. Right. And while it's easy to sort of get derailed into, well, you have reservations, and, it's easy to kind of get derailed into what could be called the more like Native American, struggle. That context is key, because on the heels of that, right, are other indigenous people displaced from an entirely different continent and then brought here, right? So most of us walking around descend from that. That's what we inherit. That our inheritance. So while most people inherit or inherit a fortune or inherit land or inherit money or inherit, or even inherit nothing, even not inherit a thing, even to scrape tooth and nail to get by college and all of this stuff, even to not necessarily inherit anything in the form of capital, you're still inheriting an entire socio-political, economic, military, industrial complex system that is geared to keeping you safe in this space that has been usurped from somebody else. So while we can make the argument that, well, that was a long time ago, okay, you have to bring continuity to what's happening now, to the chasing down and hunting down of people, and how that has happened historically, right, with the chasing down and hunting down of Native people, right? There's the receipts are there. You can find receipts. You can look at the digital archives of the price of scalps. You can find those archives. You can find that they paid $7 for men and $5 for women, and per child, right? So when you see the continuity in violence through time, starting with, and now that we're here, we're talking here, because for me, this starts prior to me getting here, right? But for us talking right here, right now, this really sort of starts with a political, a social, political, and institutional system that is sort of built and predicated on this notion that white is right, right? And the only thing that's really changed through time is the way that it can sort of shift around a little bit and move its pieces around. But it's really just more sort of posturing, because enough people got upset and either ran away or fought back, or some crazy kind of combination of both, right? Until they were physically forced to change their laws, physically forced to change. But even still, even when those changes did occur, the changes that are often happening on paper are not translating to change in the lived experiences of people.
Right.
So while we can say, well, we're not charging for scalps anymore, we're not charging for the heads of enslaved people who ran away, we're not paying out money for that anymore. Okay, but then why is there still violence and death? Why, we can find those numbers of Black and brown and indigenous people who are missing. Minnesota State right now is backlog with cases back to the 70s and 80s that are not being investigated. And there's a lot of reasons why. A lot of this has to do with practicality, but even in me saying that, it's, there's, everyone's extended, all the resources are spent and all of this sort of stuff. Okay, yes, exactly. That's the point. They're not the priority.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the priority when your entire infrastructure, everything that sustains your way of life, the car that you drive, the gas to get into your car that you drive, the medicines that you take, the clothes that you wear, the food that you eat, everything that makes up your day-to-day life, everything that makes you safe, even when you don't feel necessarily safe all of the time, but everything that stops you from seeing yourself reflected in police violence. All of those mechanisms are still at play, and they've been at play for a long time. That first step is listening, because whether it is Native people who have been fighting for their land, whether it was people from continental Africa who were fighting to not get on a boat, people who were forced and then came over here, people who ran away, people who were still, who couldn't get out, right? And spent 300 years enslaved, right? And the only reason why you had to have a labor force to work the land was because you killed off the other people that were doing it first, right? And so then once your economy is built, then once your infrastructure is set up, once your pieces are in play, once your ammo and your gun stocks and all, and the land is sort of laid out in a way where you have control and access to key water spaces, right? The prime growing spaces, the prime land growing spaces, you know, once you've sort of cleared the way for you to build your own infrastructure, then turn around and free, right, emancipate people. But when you ask this generation how their life changed, they'll tell you outright that it didn't. They'll tell you the day after emancipation, they went back to the same worker, the same plantation, still doing the same job. For an entire generation, nothing changed.
Right.
And though that seems a long time ago, especially in white minds, that seems a long time ago. For me, this is my great grandparents.
Right.
People who would still be alive had they not lived through the stress and the trauma of that, right? These are my great grandparents. My dad's mom, right? My dad's mom told him stories. This is my grandma, my dad, 1 generation gap between me and this woman. Spent the first few years of her life picking cotton, literally plucking cotton off of a plant.
Wow.
That's my grandma, right? So this isn't something that is in the distant past. This is something that gets dragged through time and space.
Yep.
And there's continuity and experience here. So while, Black experiences and African experiences and Native and Indigenous experiences and even Asian experiences, while there's a lot of, differences, and there's a range of experiences within that, there's still a continuity in the fact that these political and especially policing institutions are really sort of only set in place to guarantee that money moves and resources move in the same direction. And ultimately it is for the benefit of a certain segment of people. And I want to even hesitate to say white people, because it's for the majority of white people that really sort of buy into these ideas of everything is okay, we're moving forward, we had a Black president, Oprah has a lot of money now, Beyonce's super rich, so anyone else that's struggling now is because of their fault, right? It's that projecting that same, well, there's something must be inherently wrong with you as a person, instead of understanding that you are saying this, or you are thinking this way, or you are even subconsciously projecting this on a person that is inheriting no financial skills, right? Unless they can be cultivated on our own. And then, hashtag side research for people that want to really get into it, look into Black Wall Street. Wall Street wasn't the Wall Street that was there. There was Black people that were there that had their own economy, and they were bulldozed. Why? To protect the flow of capital towards certain groups. And there was a stark point in time where that was really, white, and I'll be specific, that was really sort of Anglo, the WASP, white, right? If you were Irish or you had any sort of weird, sort of funny accent, until you lost the accent and ditched your last name, you couldn't really belong. But it wasn't until these kinds of European descended collectives, it wasn't until they recognized that their lived experience was more similar with people of color than they were with people who looked like them, and then they started aligning themselves with these communities, and then they were given handouts, and they were open doors, then they were drafted much, right, to the team. But it's looking at the continuity of violence through time, how that violence is almost always linked to resource extraction, and that violence around resource extraction is always revolving around generating money, making money.
Yep.
That's it. That's what it's about. And there was a point in time where you needed land to do that. You know, you needed gold. You had to have a gold reserve, right? So this is, you know, sort of a little bit post Jim Crow, you know, and before, right? And then boarding school era, and then before, right? So it was kind of, you know, gold reserve. But now we're in a sort of phase where everything is more digitized. So yes, you do need land and you do need resources, but all of that is more or less secure. Now it's sort of keeping these, the algorithms that is the current Wall Street that was hijacked, right, from Black folks who set up their own economy. It's sort of feeding these algorithms now and making sure these algorithms are producing numerical outcomes that keep these systems going. So, you know, complicit in that are the banking institutions, right? So anyone still banking at Wells Fargo, at Chase Bank, anyone that's investing in these banks that are buying pipelines to still lay in the ground, that are, everyone's quarantined, right? But they're still laying down pipelines through native territories. Right. So, I mean, it's really sort of all tied in together, because it's so hard to really pinpoint really the black and white struggle. What really helps me to sort of understand this is to bring in this third, and that's this more Native American, because then when you understand this trinity here, you'll start to see Black people as the descendants of displaced indigenous peoples who have been landless, resourceless, right? Were forced to move into urban spaces in order to survive. You couldn't live in the woods. You couldn't live in the woods because that's where the KKK was, right? You could come up north, but you were met with the same sort of ideas. You were met with the same ideas. It just, you know, down south, they'll stab you in the heart with it. Up here, they'll stab you in the back with it. That's pick your, do you want to die by cyanide or do you want to die by arson? That's kind of your choice. These are your pick one, right? But when we understand Brown and Black people, as especially African Americans that have a more like historically Black places, historically Black colleges, you know, people that have been more ingrained families, there's more family lineage connection here in this part of the world, understanding these groups as displaced indigenous peoples, and then that forces you to recognize, well, what are we doing with the indigenous peoples that were from here? What are we doing with the indigenous Turtle Islands people? Well, turns out you're still doing the same things on a different day. Right. So when you see that continuity and experience, even through the range, even through the spectrum of skin tone and skin color, right? There is privilege in color. There is. And even me, I have to acknowledge that I have light skin privilege. My nose is not the nose that people think of when they think of like Africa. You know, I have my mom's nose. It's very European descendant, right? The features that I have sort of posit me in its advantages in some way. I can have a white girl voice on the phone. I've literally gotten a job where I showed up and the person that I was on the phone with was pissed. She was pissed. She was so mad. And I sort of had to chuckle like, I got you and I'm about to make this money. But it's, but not everyone can do that, right? I'm educated. Fortunately, my mom's white. And she is educated and I'm educated. Right. So getting access to these institutions, even though I'm still at a disadvantage in terms of loans and repayment and all this sort of thing. I mean, everyone's under this weight of loans, but when you sort of pile on the other spheres of weight that sort of weigh on my life, things like student loan debt takes on a totally different toll for someone like me than it would for someone who has access to a family or to a network of people that can provide a sort of economic buffer. Right. I don't have that. And even the white people that do have that, right? Let's say the worst case scenario, they get, everything falls out from underneath their feet. There's places where they can go They can walk down the street and find a homeless shelter to get into and talk to someone, because when they go and they face to face with someone, their features and their color and the fact that they're speaking English without an accent, all of that stuff plays into how quickly they can get service, what kind of service they can get, the fact that they can even walk down the street and try and find some shelter without being shot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And these it's these sort of nuances that are so easy to forget, and they're so easy to just dismiss as, well, that's just your personal problem because I don't experience that personally. And that's been my whole life, just the hardest thing it took me years to recognize that was what was going on, because I couldn't figure out for the life of me why people just don't see this. And when they do see it, it's not as bad as what I'm saying that it is. And when it is as bad as what I'm saying that it is, then it only happens every once in a blue moon. And then when it is happening more than once in a blue moon, then we circle back to argument one. Well, you guys should stop being so this, so that, so ghetto, so uneducated, so, pull your pants up, get a job, but blah, 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 blah. Then it all goes back to blaming the communities that are disenfranchised before they were even born.
Right.
Right, for the problems that people in power have with their just existing on the planet. And that's ultimately what all of this boils down to. And how they get everyone is they get everyone by, well, first of all, media blackouts, right? Not everyone gets the same information at the same time all of the time. A lot of information is suppressed. And I'm not talking about, oh, the media is treating me. I'm talking about, I'm about the fact that this whole Flint, Michigan water crisis came out during the No DAPL. That's when Flint water became a national headline. They had been dealing with that problem for 4 years. And the only reason why it came out, the only reason why it got thrown into the national media circus is to derail attention away from Standing Rock. And it's ironic that they were spraying these people with water. So there's enough water to go around to spray people who are protesting a pipeline that busted, by the way. It did. It busted. And it poisoned water and it's killing people. So you had enough water to spray people down in freezing temperatures, but you didn't have enough water for 4 years of water crisis, of water drought in Flint, Michigan. And the only reason why you want to talk about it now is to sort of split attention. First of all, is to get Black and Native people scrapping for attention, right? And then second of all, to just derail from accountability of what? Of land, resource extraction, and money.
Yep.
That's what it is. And these groups that are running these corporations, and I'm not going to say every single person in these corporations, because I understand that the most day-to-day laborers are just doing their jobs. They want to feed their families. They want to give their families the best life that they can have. They want to pay for their homes and pay for their cars and pay for their this and pay off their loans and pay their mortgages and all of this stuff. And then there's interest, and then there's compounded interest, and then you have all, and then you want to get into expanding your financial portfolio. So you have investments and CDs and all of this nonsense. It's nonsense to distract you from an entire system that the only reason why you are able to do that is because other people can't live.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's the only reason why you're able, you go to work to pay off a house. Why do you have to pay for a house? You go to work to pay off debt, to pay off interest, and it, because you have the means to consume at your own will, you think you are free because you can choose between eating at this restaurant or eating at that restaurant, or I need some water right now, or I don't have shoes so I can buy them right now, right? Because that has translated into sort of social economic mobility for you, you think that you're free. But you're not. You're still indebted to these same institutions, but how they collect from you is different from how they collect from people who are basically seen as expendable.
Yeah. I think those
And
were
what kills me,
I think those were some of those things that really caught me. And I think this is kind of where I think sometimes that white person frame of reference falls apart, right? Like,
yeah,
my husband and I are not like rich, like that's something that we're
yeah,
all gonna come at, right? Like
mhm,
we have to
mhm,
budget, we don't eat out all the time. In fact, in Christian circles,
yeah,
you have like the Dave Ramsey cult of like, we need to live super poor, what da, 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 right? You have all of these,
yeah,
ideas of like white people that go, I don't have it easy, I'm not Bill
yes,
Gates. But
yes, yes,
when I started to look at like the stats for people of color, where you've got
mhm,
like no one in your entire circle could loan you $400 if your car broke, right? Like you don't know anyone in your entire life that could
everyone in
loan
my
you
life
400.
combined could not give me $400.
Right. And that's like, I mean, if we came up $400 short, I would call my parents, our church would
Right,
come up with something, I
right,
would have a friend.
right.
Like if it came
Even
down
the fact that
to,
we're talking about $400,
right,
I don't even want to ask for $40. I think
right,
that's a lot. So
right,
there's differences just in the way that we view money. The
right.
fact that you can throw around, oh, if I need $400, when are you gonna need $400? What do you need $400 for?
Well, so this is that space, right? So
Yes, yes,
um
exactly,
the
exactly.
the thing that got me with Philando Castile, which was I think my toe in the water space, right?
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
my one that got me.
I remember.
The thing that got me about it was they put out his police record, and it was he had been stopped like
Yeah,
50
yeah,
times in like 3 years or something like that. And
yeah.
in those
Yeah.
times, most of them had been investigatory. Most of them had been, he
Mhm.
didn't do anything wrong. It was like tail light. It was like, and then, so like the first time he got stopped, he didn't have
Right,
insurance or
right.
something like that. And so they gave him a ticket. And he couldn't get off work
Mhm.
to go get the ticket paid. So then they suspended his license. So then he had to take off work
Right.
to go in and go to court for the suspended license. But in order to get there, he had to drive on a
Mhm.
suspended license. And so he kept getting
Right,
pulled
right,
over for
right.
the
And so
suspended
it's just a
license.
loop.
And so the
Yeah,
money just kept,
it's
and
just
so
busy work.
eventually he
Yeah,
owed like 17 grand. I mean, some ridiculous amount of
yeah,
money because
yeah,
he kept
yeah,
getting tickets
yeah.
and there was nothing he could do.
And
And
then
the
there's
only
late
way
fees, and
for,
then there's interest, and then
right. And the only way for him to even go and argue those would be to take a day off and lose all his pay for that day,
mhm,
right? Because he doesn't
mhm,
have paid time off.
mhm.
Plus, when you take into the idea that, like, if I were to get a ticket and I couldn't pay it, and it was between, like, I'm going to feed my kid or I'm going to pay this ticket, I could find somebody that would loan me the money to pay the ticket
Mhm,
off, right? Or I could go
mhm.
to a bank, or I personally have a couple lines of credit. I can get a credit card. Like there's
Right, right. There's options.
all of these
Yeah,
things that I just take for granted because they're part of life.
yeah.
They're part of being an adult.
Or
And they're
even
part of,
having access to lawyers.
right.
You know, could you throw, hey, does anyone know how, oh no, I work on this case all the time. Let me link you up with my friend.
Right. Oh,
Even
exactly.
even those things, it seems just small, but you're able to get help when you ask for it, when you need it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've been watching this How They See Us documentary on Netflix lately, my husband and I. And I
Mhm,
was thinking about like when I was 16, I had a car accident where I mean it was my fault. I got injured. I had to go to court because I had turned in front
mhm,
of a guy and caused an injury. And I can remember like how
mhm,
just like sick I was walking in there, just feeling like I was going to get in trouble and I didn't have any money to pay a ticket, all this stuff. And
mhm,
the judge we told the judge the story, and I had like, they had to like cut me out of the car. It was a pretty bad accident. And my mom was sitting next to me and kind of started to cry a little bit when I was talking about getting cut out of the car. And the judge felt so bad for my mom that he didn't even give us like a fine. Like he was just like, don't do this again, make good life choices, and like sent us out, right? And I'm like thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about this documentary that I'm watching on these kids that, like, there was literally no physical evidence, there was nothing except for like coerced testimony, there was proof that it was coerced, and these kids went to jail for years and years and years and years and years, right? And you just get this, there has to be a moment for white people where you go, it isn't just that slavery happened a long time ago. It is that today, how the system works for me is very different than how the system works for people of color. And it works completely different in that, like, there's a reason why nobody around you can loan you $400, and it isn't because everyone around you is a crackhead that doesn't care or doesn't have a job or whatever. It is because exactly what you're talking about, right? Like you gave a ton of very nuanced like history there that is a lot to wrap your mind around. And what I can hear white people with their first toe in the water saying is, that was 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 300 years ago, but in reality, and this is something that I would love you to kind of take just a really like elementary school level kind of walk through, because I know that you know all this stuff. So you've got slavery ends, right? And then people are not right away given the ability to be,
social dynamics don't change,
right? But they're free. And so and then you got Jim Crow, which is a buzzword that a lot of people, especially that are dipping their toe in, they don't understand what that was. And some like, and then you've got, you've got redlining, you've got all of these things happened up until like, I mean, Martin Luther King wasn't that long ago. Like my mom remembers him. So it was not like this is, thousands of years ago. At that point, you're looking at Selma, where like people are being beaten in the streets and nobody's raising an eyebrow. And you get all the way up here to Ahmaud today, and someone is being shot in the streets by white men, and there's no consequences. And that modern day lynching, I think, is something that like everybody, that clicked with some people, because you go back to like some of those movies that you've watched where you're like, man, the KKK is jerks, and white people don't want to be thought of as racist because we think of people in hoods. And the video of those men shooting him in the street felt like that. And it felt like something where a white person can look at that and go, I don't like that, just like I don't like this movie that I watched. But that isn't isolated, and it's a part of a bigger picture. And so I'm wondering if you can, one of the things that I noticed about the last amount of information that you gave us was, if I had no idea what you were talking about, I don't know that I would know what you were talking about. Does that make sense? And so if you can give me like I'm talking to a second grader, just quick history of like, just for people of color, from the space of coming here. That I love what you said about like, they were picked up. They were displaced indigenous people who were picked up, brought to a totally different continent with not even clothing. They were sold and abused. So, I mean, the idea that they started with nothing and were given nothing, and have not only had nothing, given nothing, they don't have bootstraps. And in fact, like anytime they bought themselves a pair of boots, somebody took them. Right? Like, and
because
so
of the same kind of assumptions that are here now, because they had to have stolen them. So a lot of this, And this is what's the hardest thing, is that you don't understand what you inherited. You don't understand how your forebearers did you no service to your humanity at all. Because I've watched people who I know have hearts, I know have compassion and have this capability to feel empathy. And they think that because they can feel empathy and they feel feelings, and they there's a charge there when they come to certain things, certain instances in their life, whether it's racial or not, or an animal being abused, or you know what I mean. There, that capacity for their humanity is there. But what they don't understand is that their forebearers really cut them off at the knees in their ability to broaden their understanding on how to be compassionate to people who do not look like them. Right. And a lot of this is linked to like individualism, right? We're all unique and we're all each different. And, yes, while I understand this, this tends to sort of feed into these outlier narratives, right? So we take each person as, as an individual, therefore, if they get shot, it's their fault type deal, without understanding that, are you the same processes that get you thinking towards when you see a person of color being hurt or being violated in some way, are you having the same processes when you see a white person being hurt or violated in some kind of way? And a lot of people can't be honest with themselves when it comes to that. And that's the biggest struggle. You have to be honest with yourself. When you catch that thought, you have to be honest, because it's so easy to just throw it under the rug and then just keep on chugging along.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those cultural things that we all learn, right? Like we as humans, like, we're wired not to treat each other horribly. And in order to get yourself to be as horrible as people are, you have to begin to believe that person deserves it, right? Like you have to stop seeing them. You have to stop seeing yourself in them. So that's that otherism, right? Like you have to make them something else. It has to be us and them. And then you also have to somehow go, this is how they deserve to be treated. And so, like, when you look in those slave narratives, you have this, they're not people, they're not human. And like, even now, we do it, but we do it very differently. We do it with the law, right? Like we're doing it right now at the border, where we're saying they're children. And if I think of a 5-year-old in a cage, that should bother me. But if I can go, well, but they broke the law, then I can make that a justice issue instead of a humanity issue. And so we take these places where we blame and we dehumanize people based on making them deserving of wrath versus deserving of mercy. And that's not our job, right?
See, and a lot of this is stuff that you were really sort of born with, inherited that way. Because when you think of, going back to my comment on these communities, there's an education debt there, there's an economic debt there, right? You took labor from someone and then you lock them out of a way to make money, right? You lock them out of a way to trade and to exchange, right? You positioned yourself in the land so that you're sitting on the water, you're sitting on the gold, you're sitting on the oil, you're sitting on the best trees that you cut down to make your railroads, but you don't build them. You have Asian people do that, right? You're sitting on you've already set yourself up. And then as you're doing that, you're having kids. And you're passing along these mentalities. As you build that, when you're at the apex of that, you're having kids. When all of that falls apart, you're still having kids and feeding these. And a lot of this now more than ever, a lot of this is less verbal. A lot of this is, well, we're not on a plantation where my dad and my mom can tell me that, this is a Black person and they're an animal. Actually, I don't even know that animal, because they treated their animals better. So that it's, and I really sort of want to get out of this, they treated Black people like animals. No, they didn't. They cared for animals. Facts. So this is, and this, I have to say this, a lot of this is tied to the Christian religion. A lot of this is tied to Western American understandings of, you know, Christianity, where you have the light and the dark, and, you know, there was justifications in the Bible with my God, I can't remember his name, but he had a son, and I guess he was supposed to be from Ethiopia, and he went off and did something wrong, and now everyone is cursed. Everyone from that line is cursed, and a lot of that was used to justify slavery coming over here, enslavement, excuse me, coming over here. But it's the more that you can self-educate yourself, especially from other white people who are already further along in that journey, the more you start to realize that a lot of this thought pattern happens before you even formulate the thought and decide whether or not you're going to say it out loud or not, or decide whether or not it's a good or a bad thought, right? A lot of this is so in your subconscious that you don't even know you're doing it until you're out in the street shooting somebody down, right? And then, oh, maybe I did something bad, right? But by that time, it's too late. So I would say, for most white people today, the majority of this is occurring in their subconscious. While they may not be consciously thinking about, like, oh, okay, well, my family had this land and my family lived there, and then, you know, my great grandparents did this and did that, or they came over from Scotland, or they came over from England, and then they've been on this plot of land, and, you know, now that's how my grandpa has the well out there where he's at, you know. And you don't think about these things as being something that is detrimental to other people, because it's not detrimental to you personally right now. But when you understand that the people that came before you benefited from the death or the persecution of somebody else, somebody who most often didn't look like them. And even though they might not have physically been telling you that this group is bad, or that group is bad, it's still embodied in the nonverbal, right? Because there's nonverbal cues that we pick up on. Matter of fact, kids pick up on that more than they pick up on verbal cues. They're watching their parents all the time. They see you when you make faces, when you see a Black person on TV. They feel that vibe. They know, and they get trained how to respond to certain bodies.
Yeah, I mean,
they get trained on, oh, okay, so this is how we treat people with these features. This is how we treat people with these, and it doesn't have to be verbally passed on anymore. And because people have been so situated in especially community spaces for such a long time, they've gone to a point where they don't have to necessarily be talking about it anymore. They can just sort of live their lives and not understand what they are passing along to their kids is just an unawareness on the fact that everything that their family is able to give to them now today has been because somebody else built it or died for it, or both, most likely both. And I think that's sort of the hardest thing to come up against is, you know, how do you explain someone's privilege to them when they can so easily swim around this lake of, well, you know, I broke my leg and I had to wait in the hospital for 3 hours extra, and they served this Black lady before they served me. Or, you know, or even the tough ones, you know, even the hard ones. You know, I had a Black friend, and, you know, this person and a group of other Black people beat me up, and I don't know why. You know what I mean? So there, you know, there's a lot of complexity and depth to white experiences with people of color. But I think the biggest disservice, and you see this in individual interactions with white people, but this is mostly inherited by a national system that just every 4 years there's a turnover, and it's like every 4 years everyone just forgets. They forget. You know, who's still talking about the war in Afghanistan right now?
Bernie Sanders.
Right? I mean, you know what I mean? So it's like, after a certain amount of time, everyone just forgets. And a lot of this has to do with, in my personal opinion, a lot of this has to do with sort of social engineering and social programming that keeps people distracted with, well, how can I care about what's going on halfway across the planet when I got to pay this mortgage this month? So you see how it circles back down to the individual life, and you got to be the busy bee and keep the busy work. And, well, I don't say or do anything overtly racist, so I don't understand what the big deal is. But at this point in time, if you're not actively working to understand your place in the world, where your money comes from, just look at that. Just look at where your money comes from. What is your company doing to make money? What are they doing to make money? What kind of resources are being exchanged so that you can get a paycheck cut? What is your paycheck cut relative to people above you? Do you even know? Can you even ask those kinds of questions? So the more you begin to, and it's frustrating, but people have to begin to start deconstructing their own individual lives before they can even have a shred of empathy to empathize with someone whose lived experiences they just cannot even comprehend. And that's really where everything sort of starts. We have to start, understanding every single little aspect of our own lives first. You have to start with yourself. So it's not enough to be like, well, I have Black friends, or I have Black family members, or, I have grandkids that are mixed, or, I don't say anything bad, or I do the jog, or I do the march, or, okay, yes. And also, there are calls to action that you can find in academic spaces. There are calls to action you can find in community organizing, grassroots spaces, in nonprofit spaces, and even corporate spaces. You can find calls to action where people need help, where people can use the kind of resources that you have to get the help that they need. And the reason why there's such a gap in that action is because there's, like you're saying, there's just no understanding of, why do I need to help this person when I can't even comprehend what's going on in their lives. So you start with yourself. Start with yourself. Where do you work? What do you do for a living? Where is your house at? Whose land is this? Is where did they come from?
So I can hear again
And when you start there,
I can hear again kind of that toe in the water person going, so you want me to feel guilty for having a house on land that was stolen. And that's not what you're saying at all. You're saying so there's the idea of like deserving, right? Like you're saying there's all of these people that need stuff. There is no shortage of needs out there. There's people that you could help. But when it comes to white people sharing their resources, white people sharing their platform, white people working for something else, there is a space where you determine who's worthy and who's not, and who's deserving and who's not. And the space that says there's a belief that the more somebody needs, the less help they deserve. Like, if that makes sense, right? Like the less somebody has, it must be that they don't deserve help. It must be that that they have screwed up so badly. How could you have so little if you weren't just a total mess up, right? And that isn't always even true of white people, but a lot of times it can be, like you got the kid living in his parents' basement because whatever, right? And so we have this idea that people of color are worse off than us because their culture is broken, and their cities are, the inner cities are violent because it's a violent people. There's all of these things happen in the vacuum of personal responsibility. The fact that they have nothing happens because of their choices. And the reason that all of the things that you have said in the last however long we've been talking matter is because they're all whys. Like, they are all a why for how come you and a person, or me and a person of color, do not have the same opportunities, do
Yeah.
not have the same base amount of wealth. The reason
Mhm.
that 40% of people of color can't borrow $400 from anybody in their circle is because they have a circle of people who have never had bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
They've never had anything that they've ever gotten. You know, you were talking about
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
You know, segregated education was what, like the 50s? I mean, like if you look
There
at
was
like,
nothing separate but equal about any of that. And even today it's integrated, but it's not equal across the United States. And the
right,
data shows that, right?
right,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, no, my kids go to a school that's more diverse than white, and we qualify for so much stuff because it's like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
nothing, right?
Yeah.
And the workarounds that our teachers are doing right now in
Mhm.
order to get kids what they need. I mean, like there were so many kids that didn't have even, like, my kids are working on fire tablets that were $30 at Christmas time and are all shattered
Mhm.
screens, but
Mhm.
they work, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there was a majority of students that didn't even have that in their
Yeah.
home. Or you've
Yeah.
got like 7 kids that are all sharing one laptop trying to get their school
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And they had to get free internet for once because they've never had internet at their house, and they always
Mhm.
had to go to the
Right.
library for all that stuff. Like
Right. Right.
all of the
Right.
things that, and none of that is because their parents are crack addicts. All
Yeah.
of it is
Right.
because there
Right.
is a base of, you know, you have in the 50s segregation, and then you have all the way up until today. The kids that graduate from my kids' school are going to
Mhm.
have a harder time getting into high
Mhm.
school or getting into
Yeah.
college. They're going to
Yeah.
have a harder time going forward from here, and it perpetuates itself so that every
Yes.
generation has
Yes.
a disadvantage, and it
Mhm.
goes through the system. And so when people go like, I don't want to be held accountable for Native Americans having their land stolen and
Mhm.
people coming on slave ships, that wasn't me. I'm
Mhm.
against that. I
Mhm.
don't understand why I need to care about that. And I
Mhm.
think, like, the big thing to understand is, like, it didn't get better. Like,
Yeah.
people are not
Exactly.
people are not
Exactly.
enslaved anymore necessarily, as far as like your
And then and
property.
let's just unpack this a little bit, right? Because you've said this a couple times too with you know, the black culture being broken, right? Like, you know, the inner city violence and all. Well, look at what black people do to one another and da da da. Okay, okay, yes, yes, yes. Let's look at that. Let's
Yeah.
look at what you think is going on in that context. Where do you think someone gets the ideas to treat someone so horribly? And a lot of this is just complete denial and misrepresentation of enslavement. People don't understand what enslavement was. It wasn't just, oh, you had to pick cotton or you got hurt or this. No, you're talking about torture. You're talking about where rape is the norm. You're talking about forced incest. You're talking about just and then for centuries, you condition a people who are giving birth to another generation to be conditioned again and again and again and again and again. And so when you and it's crazy because people don't understand that, right? But they understand in the white psychology world Stockholm syndrome, how someone can fall in love with their kidnapper. And that's not even, that can be even just in a short amount of time. That can be even just a couple days of having been kidnapped with someone, and then all of a sudden you think you're in love with this person. And then in the Western psychology realm, they have all the tips and tools on how to treat it and what it is, and how it works, and how it works in the psyche. What do you think that does to an entire geography of people for centuries? I'm not talking about a year or a day or, or a month or 3 years or 20 years or 50 years. You're talking about hundreds of years where you have no memory of a person who looks like you who is not getting exploited. No memory whatsoever.
Right.
See, and this is what just boggles my mind, and this is where that lack of empathy is about, well, slavery is a long time ago. Do you tell that to someone with oh, actually, matter of fact, they do tell that to people who survived rape today. Well, why can't you just get over it? You know, so and this is within the same lifetime of a person. And now we're talking about having to empathize with hundreds of years. And a lot of that data on what enslavement really is suppressed. It is suppressed. And yeah, there is a diversity of experiences where you had like some good, nice slave owners, and you had people who were enslaving others who were nice. And then you have the folks who are like, well, there are white people who worked out in the fields with people and blah, blah, blah. And yes, there is a diversity of experience in the way that the plantations were run. But the reality is that even in the best, most nicest, quote unquote, circumstances, right? It's still, this person is considered property, point blank, period. The white man out working the land, he's the one pulling himself up by his bootstraps. The Black people working the land are making the shoes, making the laces, putting it on his feet, and then standing on the ground underneath him as he stands up and then has kids. Mm-hmm. Right? We're talking about people who were forced to get pregnant when the mistress was pregnant. They were forced to get pregnant so that they would have milk at the same time, so that when she had her baby, the enslaved person's baby was removed. They were given water, or they would boil rice, or if they could sneak some milk from an animal, they would dip it in a rag, and that's how they were feeding enslaved kids, right? But then the Black mothers were ones that were breastfeeding the next generation of people to grow up and sell their kids. So, I mean, you want to talk about, oh, the Black family's broken, and, the problem is not single Black mothers. Like, stop. The problem is not Black men. The problem is not, oh, well, you can't get your family together. Oh, you don't have a family unit. Oh, your culture, or you're violent, or rap and hip hop, and you swear, and all of this. No, that's not the problem. That's not the problem. Everything that you're trying to use as a way to not care, everything that you're talking about right now is directly linked to trauma. To hundreds of years. And that's just in this country. That's just 300 years in the United States. They were doing this before in Africa, before people even got here. They were already conditioned in Africa, and then was brought over here. And then it was 300 years from there. But you're talking hundreds of years before in an entirely different place. So you have hundreds of years where certain behavior is the norm. And because these people are less than animals, because these people are less than human, less than animals, because they're either justified by their science, they're justified by their God for what they believe in, it becomes secondary, where you don't have to all of that trying to make people less than you, all of that's done with. They already did that work. They already thought through and built those neural pathways in the brain. They already built that logic. They already connected those wires. Those wires are already connected for you guys. And then they had kids who are already wired that way. So it becomes something that moves from the forefront of, that it becomes something that moves from the conscious discussion of, well, how do we justify this? How do we justify the fact that we like treating other human beings this way? That work is already done. Now it's subconscious. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that your forebears did you an act to humanity that I'm sure that you feel in your heart of hearts, that you feel like you're a human being, that you're capable of compassion, capable of empathy, you're capable of caring. But I'm telling you right now, there are limits to that. There are biological, physical limits to that. Why? Because you had people that already did that thinking hundreds of years before you. They did that rationale. They did that thinking in the forefront of their consciousness. And they got a whole system to agree with it. And they could reinforce it with gunpowder. They can reinforce it with guns, I mean, and violence. They could reinforce it. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, if it was wrong, we shouldn't be able to do this. But the fact that these people just won't run away, or the fact that these people, you know, and then you get into the victim blaming narratives that still is prevalent today.
Right. So I'm seeing two threads in what you're saying. What I want to do is I want to take them from where you have them in slavery, and I want to run them to here, because I really think that white people don't count this space, right? They go, it's 300 years. I don't think of people the way that a slave owner does. And it's 300 years. How can Black people have not gotten their crap together, right? And so like that, all of that's inaccurate, and I just want like that out there. I'm asking stupid questions so that you will answer them, because I know that I'm wrong, right?
I know.
So, but you know, the Civil War was fought over the idea that the economy would crash if we declared Black people to be people, right?
Yes.
And so it's like what you're talking about, it's money, right? And so even after
labor extraction.
Yeah. And you see even today that like states' rights, like a lot of that stuff goes way back to that. Like it goes way back to like, I don't want any white person telling me how I need to live as another white person. I should be able to handle my own affairs, right? And you're seeing it even like that has gone all the way through to today, but it was grounded in money. It was grounded in
labor extraction, resource extraction. And even more so, you know, it was when we're talking about enslavement, I feel like people don't make connections. I feel like they get more triggered with the inhumanity of Hitler and the Holocaust than they do with enslavement. Not understanding that what he did, how that whole system, extend that for 300 years.
Right.
But there's so much conditioning around the way that Black and brown bodies are perceived. Right? The beast of burden. We're tougher than everybody else. We can take more. And a lot of that you're not thinking in your consciousness, but it's running. Those programs are running in your subconscious. They are. And when you find, okay, so let me go back to, so how do we make this continuity between people that were completely traumatized in their own homes, then generations later move to an entirely different space, were traumatized again in an entirely different locale, and then hundreds of years later, all of a sudden everything's supposed to change, except that it doesn't, because white landowning males still want to keep making money. There's already an interest in keeping sex slavery going, pedophilic rings going. There's already a lot of this is linked to just personal gratification from the complete control and domination of another person.
Right.
And those tendencies don't go away. So even though things may have quote unquote changed for Black people, they didn't. First of all, they didn't change as a whole. Second of all, what did change was on paper. Third of all, most of those changes didn't really impact white people, except maybe get them mad at the fact that Black people didn't have to move across the street from them anymore when they were walking. Right. So a lot of this is ego. And I don't know how I can bridge that continuity, because to me, it's so obvious. Because it's the same narcissism. It's the same problems. It's the same people going missing, kids going missing. But you don't hear about that in the white community circles, because you have the mass of white communities here. You've got the people who are more or less the modern day enslavers today, right? They keep this group herded and corralled off from anything else. And then they keep desensitizing them. They keep desensitizing them to everyone else's problems, so that it's not a big deal, so that we don't believe people when they come forward and when they share their stories, when they share these things. You're already conditioned to not believe that anything I'm saying is true, or that if it is true, it didn't happen as long as, you know, there's always going to be some way to doubt, because there's a cognitive dissonance that occurs. But you have to learn to be comfortable when you're triggered.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I
have
mean,
to learn to be comfortable when, you know, when you're hearing these stories, how, gauge. I would suggest, you know, moving forward, when you hear someone tell you something, especially a person of color, especially when it's about trauma, either contemporary trauma or historical trauma, when you hear that, how quickly are you to either dismiss it, or to think that it's not as bad, or to not believe this person in some way? And you may not understand that, well, I'm thinking that, you may think that, well, I don't believe them because they look like they might not be telling the truth, or because it doesn't sound real. You know, it's not because of how they look, right? I don't know.
It's important for my world to make sense, right?
Yes.
If
Yeah,
my if I can't trust police, then what happens? Like,
exactly.
if I can't
Exactly.
trust the justice system, then what happens?
Then what? Yeah.
It's so much easier for me to go, you did something wrong, than
Mm-hmm.
for me to go, the things that I believe in are not what I think they are.
Yes.
And
And a
so,
lot of this is linked to the sinner narratives. A lot of this is linked to everyone born into sin, everyone is a sinner, everyone is bad until they come to know Jesus, right? So a lot of times the remedy turns into sort of this religious dogma, where you have to jump through the flaming hoops of Christ in order to, you know, truly be redeemed. And even then, you're only going to turn white. You're going to lose every other part of your beingness, right? And until you do that, you're still worthless. And a lot of this has to do with the way that especially Christians are programmed to view their own kids. I mean, I grew up listening to how I was born into sin, how I was born sin, I was born bad, I was born dirty, and all of this other kind of stuff. I mean, you tell that to your own kids, and they look like you, they came from you.
mm-hmm.
How much more so do you have these and it makes so much sense. It's just so easy to just, oh yeah, cool, and now I'm free, and da da da, and now we're going to talk about the love of Christ, without realizing that you had all of this stuff come before that you just condensed, you just collapsed it in your mind to get to this. Yeah, and now I have a solution.
I like where you're headed with that, in the sense of, like, right, you have that in Christianity, you have that conversion experience, right? So I
Yeah.
was a sinner and now I'm
Mm-hmm.
saved. And so I'm not going to live back in the past, because Jesus
Mm-hmm.
forgot that. That's far as east is from the west.
Right.
We're going to go
Right.
on from here. And
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
hear from you is a lot of that, right? Like, a person of color will start talking about all of the history, and you go,
Mm-hmm.
that's in the past though. We need to go on from here.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
need to start
Yes.
today and then go forward.
Yes.
And the thing is that if we were to start today though, we don't start at the same spot,
No, we
because
don't. We
all of the things that happened have
Mm-hmm.
disenfranchised a group of people. And
Yes.
if we try and say everybody starts at the same line, then
Mm-hmm.
the only reason that we're not still equal is because you did something
You
wrong.
have a personal
Right.
defect, and
Right.
hey, heads up, I know a guy who can fix that for you.
Right. We all just need
Right.
Jesus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And then
the
that's,
fun thing is,
yeah,
like, we all just need Jesus doesn't mean that I need to address how I am not treating you the way Jesus did. We all need
or
Jesus means
it
that I need
also,
to tell you how you should act, right?
yeah, and it also keeps the conversation on the individual level, instead of
Right.
understanding the structure of society, the way
Right.
that society is structured. It
Right.
keeps us out of those kind of conversations.
Right. So one of the things that I liked about what you were saying, and kind of when I was talking about having that string between the two
Yeah.
spaces, is so when you talk about, what happened to the psyche for Black people in
Yeah.
slavery, right? You've got,
Yeah.
when you make it so that you can never be attached to your kids, you can never be attached to your
Ever.
spouse, you can have the slave owner can come in and rape your wife in bed with you just to demasculate you, like that's a start, right?
Or
And
rape
that,
your husband. Or rape your husband. Who's going to protect you? Who's going to protect you then?
right, right. I mean, so there's like there's nothing that you can do, and the point of that was to break them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, so we can go, that was horrible, but that didn't stop there, right? Like when you're talking about lynchings, when you're
Yeah.
talking about things
Church bombing.
in this century,
Mhm.
you're talking about, you know, I can't send my kid outside because they might end up at the
Yeah.
top of a tree. They might end up raped. They might end up, because they're still not people. And
Yeah.
part of what the Black community right now is saying is that's still true.
Yeah.
I can't go for a jog. I
Mhm.
can't have a cell phone in my hand.
Nope.
I can't. I
Can't
was
have
talking. I was talking to a friend who, she's got 5 boys, and she's taught them how to get off the ground without using their hands, so that they can go from laying to standing without moving their hands, so that they don't get shot. And I was just like,
Or so that their shoulders don't get dislocated when they're full weight, when they're handcuffed and their full weight falls forward on their shoulders. Yeah. Yeah.
right, yeah. And so there's this entire like reality that is still based in the dehumanization of people, right? And this idea that this idea that like you don't get to be secure in anything, right?
Yeah.
And when you talk about mass incarceration right now, like when you talk about in the 80s and 90s, the war on crime, and the people, I mean, they took a generation of men out of community and put them into jail. And so you have all of these single moms, and it's not always because they don't have somebody that wants to be with them.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's because they got pulled over on an investigatory stop. They had a joint in the
Or they
car.
looked like someone they were looking for, or
Right.
someone lied
Yeah.
about being robbed or raped,
Yeah.
and they went and found someone to. So a lot of this is just like, a lot of this is just. It reminds me of, I saw this post today where someone said, everyone's always, why does everyone always ask a woman, and this is right, this is more geared towards women in domestic violence, they always ask the women why they stayed in an abusive relationship, but they never question why the man is abusive.
Right. Right.
And
Why
then
didn't
it's
you
the
just
same
leave?
thing. Why didn't, and now it's the same thing with Ahmaud. Well, why didn't he just comply? I mean, I don't know if you've seen that group on Facebook where they're calling for justice for the father and son that hunted this guy down and lynched him in the middle of the street. They're calling for justice because these two God-fearing men were protecting their neighborhood from a string of break-ins. Fact check. There was no string of break-ins. The receipts are back on that. There's no robberies that happened in that area, first of all. Second of all, they went on about how they wanted to ask him some simple questions, but he didn't comply to simple commands. It's just ingrained that we have to subject ourselves to whatever the hell white people want to do at the time. And if we get hurt, or if we get killed, or if we get severely injured, or if something traumatic happens, well, then why didn't you comply? Why did you swear at him? Why were you mad? Why were you this? Why were you that? And it's going back to this same thing where we blame people for staying in an abusive relationship without addressing the fact that no one's asking this person why you keep putting your hands on somebody else. No one wants to do that because that's too hard. That's too difficult. And it's scary. And it's so much easier to be mad at people who don't jump through hoops and walk on eggshells so they don't get hurt, instead of addressing the ones that are constantly putting their hands on somebody else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it
It's a
is
sickness. It's
it
a
is
sickness, and it happens in our interpersonal data, even in the white communities. Even in white communities, that sickness is there with people who are, say you have a white couple, right? And one's hitting the other, or one is sexually abusing the other, or financially manipulating the other. And it's, you always go to person A and say, well, why did you stay with them? Instead of going to person B and saying, why are you doing this to this person?
right.
They
Yep.
don't do that. And if you're not going to ask those questions of your own group, within your own people that you claim to love and care about, how are you going to understand hundreds of years? You can't, because you cannot reconcile one instance in a single lifetime. You can't reconcile just a few years in a single lifetime, let alone an entire continent for hundreds of years. You're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to have the skills to do it. So until
Well,
you start, yeah, go ahead.
and a lot of the pent up, a lot of the violence and the things that are happening in communities of color, like
Mm-hmm.
I look at how angry white people are right now that somebody would ask them to wear a mask, right? Like a white
Mm-hmm.
person shot a security guard in
I
the
know.
head for
I know.
asking them to wear a mask into a dollar store.
I
Like that's
know.
how angry white people get when they feel
I
like
know.
things are unjust, right?
Hell hath no
So
fury like a mildly inconvenienced white person.
like let's just take that as our root of empathy as white people, right? Like think
Mm-hmm.
about when something is truly unfair, like truly unfair, like something, and no matter how much Karen time you put into talking to the manager, it doesn't change.
Yeah.
And how angry you get, or like all you have
Yeah.
to do to really rile up evangelicals is to tell them that somebody is going to take away your religious freedom. And as soon as something that you believe is your right is
Yeah.
taken from you, you lose your mind. So
Yeah.
let's now take that into the context of communities of color where they can't provide for their families, they
Mm-hmm.
can't get loans, they can't
Mm-hmm.
get jobs, they
Mm-hmm.
can't,
And even when they do get loans, they're at rates that are higher for their white counterparts getting the same kind of loans.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Keith Ellison talks about how expensive it is to be poor, and like
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
like if you don't have good credit, they charge you a fee to have their credit card. If you overdraft in the bank, they charge you $30 for having not enough money, right? Like you
Yeah.
already don't
Yeah.
have enough, and that
Mm-hmm.
stuff compiles, and kind of like what I was talking about with Philando, right? Like it just compiles to the place
Yeah.
that you're so far under that you can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's nothing that you can ever do because the system is so stacked against you, and
Yeah.
there's nobody to go to for help. And
Yeah.
then the less you have, the
Yeah.
less deserving people think
Mm-hmm.
you are of help.
Of help.
And the
Yeah.
more they believe that you deserve what you're getting. And so the more then they compile that. Like that was what was
Yes.
happening with
Yeah.
Philando.
Yeah.
Like he kept getting pulled over because his license plate kept showing up so the cops would drive by, they'd run his plate just because they're behind him. It would show
Mm-hmm.
up that he'd been pulled over a bunch, so they would pull him over again,
Again.
right? Like, and it would just compile because there's this belief that the less you have, the less you deserve. And so can you, that level of just like unfairness, and then you add on to it what you were just talking about, that idea of like people believing that you should be told what to do all the time, and that you should
Yeah.
comply. And not only
Yeah.
should you comply, but you should know ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because with policing right now, they just have to be afraid of you. You don't have to
Yeah.
have done anything. If they're threatened by you, they have a right to shoot you. And so you
Mm-hmm.
have to somehow figure out what about your person would threaten a white person, and then
Yeah.
not do that, even though, and this was something that I learned, white people that are watching this, 13th is a really good documentary on Netflix, and it explores the idea of, when you were talking about kind of that ingrained psyche, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think for white people, that idea of like Black people being threatening. Like
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
people shut down their inherent compassion, right? Like we have
Yeah.
inherent, we're not supposed to treat each other this way. There's the dehumanization of Black people from centuries ago, but the narrative of Black people being scary, that is again perpetuated by the idea of inner cities being violent, all of those things, Black
Mhm.
people being
A lot of
stronger, like
yeah,
all
again,
that
a
stuff.
lot of that thinking too was done in like you had like blackface, right, in the
Yeah.
media before. So again, again, a lot of that thinking was already done. So now it's back here, and now you just are either fighting with it in your day to day, or you're just going with it, and you're not
And
seeing it.
we believe that if we are protecting ourselves, we can
Mm,
do whatever we want, right? Like
right,
when
right.
you get into protective mode, when you feel threatened, you stop seeing people and you start justifying violence.
Okay,
And
okay, okay,
so,
okay, okay, okay. Yes, yes. So you understand that when it
right,
relates to you.
right,
But then
right,
inner city violence is all of a sudden just a mystery. Like
right,
stop, stop,
right,
stop.
right.
Right,
That's really good.
right. I mean, it only works when it applies to you, and that's what I see about just the hypocrisy of these groups. That you only get it when it applies to you. And yes, we can chalk this up to the human condition to some degree, but this goes back to what I was saying before, where your forebears really capped you off while they may have thought they were passing on the best of the best of the best internally, especially the mental cognitive components. It's not there. You literally have to be face to face with it in your own life in order to get a semblance of understanding. And then what do? You shoot a guy in the face for doing his job.
Right.
I thought y'all were supposed to be for the police. I thought y'all were supposed to be protect your brothers in blue and all of this stuff. I thought cops' lives matter. Oh, but you're a person now. You understand what it means to want to be violent. It's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy. It's ingrained in the politics. It's ingrained in the religion. It's ingrained in the silence. It's science. It's ingrained in in the academic community. It's ingrained in every single aspect of this society
It's
because
ingrained.
because it has made money for a select, again, this, we're talking about a small group of people that the majority of the people that are going to watch this are not a part of. You're not. You think you're benefiting? You're not. You're thinking making money? You think you're making money? You're not. Because for every little bit of money that you think you're making, someone else is making more. So again, all of this feeds into a small segment of people, a small group of people that own about 90% of the planet's wealth. And all of those people are white, all of them.
Mhm.
But not all of them consider you to be their equal. And
Right.
that's the kicker. That's the kicker.
And if they can pit poor white people against Black
Against
people, against
everybody else.
immigrants,
Mhm.
against, yeah, if they can
Middle
make,
class against blue collar
right,
middle class against white collar middle class. If they can keep all those segments sort of fragmented, right? Keep everyone sort of fighting for the scraps at the table. We're too busy fighting each other to realize that there's a whole world out there where we don't even have to interact with each other if we don't want to. But
right.
some of this comes down to again these Christian notions of evangelizing. That's a huge it's not enough that you are living your life the way that you're living your life, and it's not enough that I don't approve of the way that Black people live in inner city spaces. We need to correct that the way that we see fit, right? So there's this sort of going out in the world and having a meddling in every single thing, and then when you don't want to act, it's because of situations that you don't understand. And then when you finally do understand it, when you finally do lose your shit, right? Because you think you're being oppressed. And I say that carefully because I know in each of those situations, that person that did that violent action towards, I know that they felt like they were oppressed. I know that was probably the first time that they felt any sort of confinement or intrusion on who they are as a person. I know that that's probably very, very real to them. But when you look at the frame of reference about what it means to struggle on this planet, it's very narrow. It's very narrow. And shooting someone because they didn't comply, shooting someone because they didn't stop to answer your questions when you wanted them to stop, shooting someone because they were following CDC protocols in the midst of a global pandemic to do their job, to ask you to put on a face mask. I understand that a lot of what is common sense to me is not really like common thinking for a lot of people. It's just, it's not common thinking for a lot of people. And they've never really had to think about this until they're in a situation where they feel like their rights are being infringed on, so there's already sort of this like you were saying, there's already sort of context with the quarantine. You're already being told that you're being violated. You're already being told that you're being oppressed, and then, in the middle of the pandemic, you have this longer scale of oppressed Christians that are just martyrs from the entire world when you're not. You're not. I lived in Haiti. I know what oppressed Christians look like. They don't look like white upper middle class people in their suburbia. You're not. Stop. Right? So you already have these narratives that feed you this information, that you are disadvantaged, that you are hurting, that you're a sinner, that you're this, that you're that you are broken, that you are, now you are broken and now healed and still being oppressed, right? Because of who you are, right? So it's like a revolving door of mirrors where it's like you understand the struggle of Black people until a Black person is struggling it. Then you don't understand. Then you can't comprehend how someone can be violent. But then when the revolving door comes back around and you're in your hall of own mirrors, you're ready to gun someone down in the street. Then you understand violence. Then you understand what destitution feels like, even though in the context of, right, if we're comparing, a guy being asked to put on a mask versus a guy, who's running away from someone who enslaved him, right, two entirely different frames of struggle. But on the inside, that those internal mental body responses is still going to register. It's can still register the same. So I don't want to dismiss that mind body registration of oppression. But what you have to do is you have to contextualize the place of your physical body to that. Right. So this guy asking you to put on a face mask, well, that's an infringement of my rights. That's an infringement on my liberties. That's an oppression to me. Okay, well, let's look at where your physical body is placed right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I think this comes back to some of that stuff of, even just that slave mentality of like the slaves should have listened, right? Like that idea that that idea that I should be able to beat you and that should teach you something. And if you're not learning it, then I need to beat you harder because it's your fault and it's your problem. And that's what happens a lot of times in these conversations, right? Like when we're talking about a white person's rights being infringed upon, then we're all a group. But when we're talking about oppression of people of color, we come at it again from that white overlord feel of like authority should be followed by you, but I should own every kind of gun in the history of the world just in case I have to rise up against the government, right? Like I should be able to and just
a side note, if you are stockpiling guns as a means to defend yourself from the government, you don't know how tanks work.
Right.
Uncle Sam, we're not out to get your guns. No one wants your guns. They don't. Most people just want you to leave them alone.
Well,
I mean, that's just facts. That's just the reality.
and honestly, if it came to it, what are you going to do? The two people in the world that you think everybody should blindly respect and follow are the troops and police officers. Who's going to come for your guns? And are you going to shoot them? And if so, again, there's a disconnect here that you should have the right to shoot whoever you want so that you get rights. But if a person of color is pulled over for no reason and is complying with police and moves wrong
and still ends up dead.
shot, right? It could have been that maybe they had a gun.
Shouldn't have worn that. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't have this responsibility anymore with authority, right? Like, so police have guns. Like, they have the ability to shoot anybody that they want to. Like, they're the authority figure. And so we ought to hold them to a standard that's much higher than the person that they're arresting, right? Like, that's what authority is. Like, my son smacks me sometimes because he's 5 and he's not always very kind. And you know what? I don't get to make him bleed, right? Like, I have to be the adult. Like, I don't get to shoot him because he came at me because he's 5, right? And like, but I want to catch myself in that. I am not saying, because sometimes people make a comparison then, and that puts you back into the, like, people of color are children, which is not like where I'm headed.
Oh yeah, the parent to child thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you're talking about equity and power. You're talking about equity and power relationship.
Right.
Which is a much broader conversation. And yes, absolutely. And even just, not just a Black person getting pulled over. What about a Black person shooting another Black person? Right? Having that being a justification for why police need to be the way that they need to be. Okay, but when white people shoot other white people, police don't treat them the way that they treat Black people shooting other Black people.
Right.
And this is the disconnect. And a lot of this is disconnected information, because there are segments of the government that are coming out with data. The FBI release facts that the FBI's top priority in this country right now, the top domestic terrorist in this country right now, is right-wing white supremacists.
Good.
These are the top domestic terrorists in our country right now. Right. But then, I don't want to believe that because that's all the liberal agenda and all this. There's always a way to swim around the fact that you don't want to see other people as people, because it messes up your idea of what your job is. Because if other people are people and they're just fine doing whatever the hell they're doing on the planet, then there's nothing for you to do. There's no one for you to save. Right? There's no resource for you to extract. Everything about what you're told your purpose is in this lifetime just falls apart, because everything you're told about your purpose here is predicated on somebody else being the sinner. It's somebody else being wrong. It's predicated on something else it's predicated on somebody else being influenced by, right? But if in fact these people are just fine, we can just leave them alone, though, they can govern themselves and do what they need to do to take care of themselves and families, then where does that leave you? And of that is they don't want to feel that disconnect in their own religious dogma. And so when that gets threatened to fall apart, then we do this posturing dance of, well, what was she wearing? Why was she doing that? Why were they out so late? What were they doing over here? Why were they talking like this? Why was he listening to hip hop and all, then it's just, then you have all the subconscious rationale that you inherited comes to the forefront now. And it's only to protect this dissonance that's occurring in the mind.
I think that we all want to believe that we're
the good guy. So we don't believe Black people when they say things. Yes. Right. Yeah. No one wants to see themselves as the enslaver. No one wants to see themselves as the officer that's shooting someone. No one wants to see themselves as being complicit in the oppression of another person. And it's easy to swim around that when you're the most oppressed group on the planet, right? You're the martyrs of the planet. So when you're the most oppressed group, everything else, nothing else is going to hold any sort of water for you. And it's going to be too easy for you to swim around the data, to swim around the facts, because there's going to be suspicion of the research, and there's going to be suspicion of this, and there's going to be some kind of agenda somewhere, and, you know, stay woke and all, you know, all of this other kind of stuff. So until people start working within their own minds to ask themselves, honestly, genuinely start asking themselves these kind of hard questions. Do I see other people who are different from me? And if your answer is no, I don't see color, no, I don't see when people are different from me, you're lying. And it seems hypocritical that I'm saying, you know, believe people when they tell you things, but don't believe yourself when you say, because here's why. Here's why this argument of I don't see color is so ridiculous. When you pull up to a stop sign, what do? You
stop.
You stop. Why? Because you see the color red and you know what it means to stop. Like, don't tell me you don't see distinction. Don't tell me you don't see color. Right. That line is utterly nonsense. It's utterly nonsense. You're not colorblind. You're not.
Well, and it's not the goal. I mean, I think that think that white people think that if they can say, I'm colorblind and I don't see any distinction, we're all people, then that's the right answer, because then you're not being racist. I'm not thinking anything different about you than I would about a white person. But really, you're what you're saying is you're lying, and not because you're lying, because inside each of us we see differences, and and we have to see differences. Like the whole point of the whole point of why we're doing this is because I need to listen to you. If I say I don't see anything different between you and I, well, then I've put us again at that equal space, right? I've said there's no difference between you and me. And so if there is a difference in our circumstances, it must be because of something you're doing, right? And so we've gone all the way back in the circle.
All the way back, yeah.
Right. And that's why when people say I'm colorblind, like, people of color lose it on you. Because what you are saying to them is, if there's a difference between you and I, it's not a human difference. It's your fault.
Right. It's an other difference. Yeah, exactly. And you know that, and even just in terms of raw survival as a species, if you can't pick up on patterns, I don't know how your group made it out the caves. Right. I don't know how you fought off the saber-toothed tiger. I mean, if you really can't see all of this stuff, you know, the brain is a magnificent tool. It really is. The brain is capable of taking in so much data at just a fraction of a millisecond, right? So your brain is picking up on these distinctions oftentimes, and this is the thing with white privilege and complacency, right? Is that because all of that thinking is already done, right? They can sort of focus on their own everything in their main frontal consciousness here is centered on, what do I want to do in this life as an individual? Because all that other thinking is already done. All of that, everything that props your family up, that props your community up, that props your society up, all that work's already done for you. So the only thing you have to focus on is who I want to be as an individual. What do I like? What are my passions? Me. What can I consume? Even if that goal is, I want to care for other people, even if it's an altruistic thing that you're trying to strive for, there's still a backlog of data that tells you how and when and why this can get done, right? And when anything challenges that, you have a backlog of data that informs you about what danger looks like, right? And it went from looking like saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths or whatever it was that that your group was facing at that time in time space on the planet. It goes from that, through the backlog of dangerous people, right? Because there's been dangerous people on the planet, and we need to know what these people look like. And I need to listen when my grandparents or my dad or my mom tells me, hey, don't mess with that tribal because they'll shoot your eye out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there's, that pattern recognition is what keeps us safe. That's what, it's part of our survival mechanism as human beings, right? So that to be constantly denying that you have that is it's a denial of, it's a denial of the capacities, the magnificent capacities that you inherited in this one organ of your brain to intake data and turn that into experience, turn that into logic and reason, turn that into how do I keep my body safe? And then once that's established, how do I keep ones that I am emotionally at in my heart knowledge? How do I keep my heart safe, right? And that's the people you love, your family, right? Your friends, the people you care about, right? So then, you know, we're sort of at that space where we're not having to worry about our physical, a lot of us are not having to worry about our physical safety anymore, right? But we still inherit that data that keeps us safe. And that is why you don't have to worry about your physical safety anymore, because somebody else already did that for you, right? But the way that they did that is by endangering people that don't look like them. And that's what I inherited, right? So then when we finally meet each other face to face, we have completely different backlogs on how to survive on the planet.
There was
And so when we have to consider honestly, you know, the frame of reference for what it means to struggle on this planet. What does your family struggle look like? What does your lineage struggle look like? Where your family comes from, what do those struggles look like? And I don't mean a tit for tat, you know, oppression Olympics type deal, but you know, start with your own body, start with your own person. How realistic is this sense of danger to me right now? And when you take that time through all, and it's hard because you have a whole backlog of data that throws your nervous system, that throws your adrenal system into response. That's real. You have a parasympathetic nervous system that throws you into a panicked response that gets you in that fight or flight mode over circumstances and situations that other people, right,
Mhm.
would not even think twice as a problem, where other people are trying to get to that as norm. The things that you consider dangerous, the things that you consider threatening, that's where people are trying to get to as the norm of safety.
So I love that, like that fight or flight, like
Yeah,
brainstem
yeah,
space.
yeah.
One of the newest things that I have learned lately that really just rocked me. I went to a conference and this guy was talking about how they were talking about like whiteness, just
Mm-hmm,
everything that is whiteness
mm-hmm.
being the norm, right? And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the water that we swim in that we don't even understand is the water that we swim in. And
yeah.
what he said was, he was like, in my mother's womb, before I took a breath in this life, I was divergent from the norm. So from
Mm-hmm,
the time that I stepped into this planet, I
mm-hmm,
was wrong, right? Like
mm-hmm. Yeah,
if everything that is white is correct, if everything that is white is normal, then from the
mm-hmm,
moment that he was wrong, the moment that he was born, he was wrong. And
mm-hmm.
the idea that brainstem part of us, that fight or flight part of us that goes, something that is divergent from normal is a threat, right?
Yes,
Anything that
yes,
isn't
yes.
what we expect it to
And
be.
I mean, I don't, that in and of itself is not bad, right? That's what's kept you alive, right? I mean, that process in and of itself, you can't demonize that process, because that's a beautiful mechanism that has kept our species alive on this planet, right? But it's recognizing that that divergence from normal, it's seeing through the filters, the other filters that sort of come more this way in our brains, right? So then you get politics of respectability, you get it's your fault, or this barely happens, or if it does happen, it's not as bad as people say that it is happening. So you have this disconnect in experience where I don't have a backlog of experience to tell me what danger looks like for someone who has been enslaved for 300 years.
Well, and I guess like this is where like, so for white people, right, there's this inherent fear of anything that is not
Yeah.
white, and yet
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
even see white as a culture, right? Like we just
No,
think that's like white people don't have culture, it's
it's
just
a bunch of
normal.
individuals.
Right.
Right.
Well, just
Right.
everything that is white culture is normal, and everybody else
Mhm.
has culture, right? And that's
Yeah.
not true. That's not true, but that's like how white people see the world. And
Or it's
so,
American, or or there's a national component to it. Like,
right.
that's just American. I'm just doing American things. And then you have Asian Americans and African Americans and Native Americans, and you have the divergent of the American who is
Right.
me, and
And
everyone
so,
looks like me.
and anything that doesn't look like me is therefore divergent and therefore a threat. And
Right.
so the part of me that has compassion for things that are like me
Mm-hmm.
is automatically thrown into a space of threat. And
Yeah.
that's that place where like when people talk about privilege,
Mm-hmm.
it's whiteness, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
idea that everything about you is normal and
Mm-hmm.
everything about other people is other.
Yeah.
And like you have to really understand the things that you take for granted and don't even catch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the flip side of that, this part of the brain over here, when you're talking about people of color, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that everything in the world is a threat, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
divergent
Yeah.
from all that is normal,
Mm-hmm.
then every part of the world has the capacity to kill you because you were born
Your
divergent,
very
right?
existence. Yeah. Your
Yeah.
very existence is a
And
threat.
so you have this, like, how do you even live in that space? Like, how do you even survive in the space of everything that is normal around me is a threat to me? Like, and yet you're not
It's
allowed to be
very,
threatened or defensive about it.
no,
Like, you're
or to
not
be
allowed to
angry.
defend yourself or angry,
Right.
right?
You can't be angry. You can't be upset. You have to be educating someone, and, which there's a time and space for that. But it's, everyone copes with it in different ways. Everyone copes with it in different ways. Some people drink, some people smoke, some people find Jesus, and they try and find safety in the religious institutions that enslaved us. That's probably the most common, though that is really on the decline now, because a lot of people in my generation and younger they're not buying into this white Jesus narrative anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and or the money Jesus narrative anymore. Um, Everyone copes with it in different ways, which is why I wouldn't recommend like finding a local Black person and learn from them today. Like, no, we have to deconstruct all of this still.
Right.
Right. And so recognize that, if you do have Black friends, or you do have Black people in your life, and you want to ask these questions and you feel comfortable asking these questions, that's one thing. Though understand that, even just you trying to make them your source of how to understand how to understand race relations through time. Right. So it's one thing to ask them about their personal experiences or their personal ideas and experience. And I'll tell you, as a brown person, I'll tell you right now that they're probably most likely they're going to filter their response. It's going to be nice. It's going to be gentle. And um, a lot of that is that backlog of catering to white fragility, so I don't get killed, so I don't get cast out of the tribe, so I don't so I don't have access to food or water or my family or my kids anymore. So, recognize that there's a lot of spaces for you to find the knowledge that you need, and the mental emotional tools that you need to sort of deconstruct bit by bit how your individual role in all of this. There's spaces for you where people have done that work for you and have written that out for you or have made podcasts or, all this sort of thing. But recognize that if you are engaging, especially, with more random people or maybe even people in your life, I don't know, but recognize that any sort of response, angry response, harsh response, however you perceive the response, recognize that working through intergenerational trauma while trying to problem solve with people descended from your oppression of intergenerational trauma, trying to problem solve together how to fix this, how to address this moving forward, knowing full well that there's no reference to compare in their historical experience the pain and suffering that you've gone through. It's difficult, and everyone copes with it in different kinds of ways. So when you see Baltimore and Ferguson burning, when you see people rioting, or when you see people throwing bricks at buildings, or when you see things on fire, you know what I mean? Recognize where, again, you have these respectability politics, right? And then you have this capital consumer backlog in your mind that says you're burning down businesses, you're destroying time, you're a debt to equity, because if you are against money, right, you're against my safety and everything that has built me up and my family and my community to exist here, right? So recognize where you may be more triggered about protesters in Baltimore burning down a building, an inanimate object, right?
Mm-hmm. Than the person that
more
was murdered.
Triggered over that,
yeah,
than the police, than the person, than the human being that was murdered, right? So you'll slowly start to find those things in yourself. You will, but you have to be willing to do the work. But do the research first. Everything's online now, everything's digitized now. You can find professors to talk to, and get a variety of sources. I'm of the belief that confirmation bias is a very real thing. You'll often go searching for answers that you want to get, and you subconsciously already know where to get those answers that just fortify everything that you already believe. So you're going to go to your one Black friend, or your 3 Black friends, or your 7 Mexican friends, or whatever, whoever they are. And chances are a lot of them may confirm your bias. And I can tell you that as someone who confirmed white bias for a long time to survive.
Yeah.
I confirmed white bias for a long time just to survive, just to get out of having that conversation.
Yeah.
So, it's like, you take a prisoner of war, and then, you bring them back, you bring them back from that space where they were at in another country somewhere. And then you want to go to them the next day and be like, okay, let's go back over to the country where you're at, and let's figure out how to, make this government different now.
Right.
On
right.
top of working through the trauma, still having to go into the future, and still having the past not reconciled and not acknowledged.
Right.
You can't build towards anything in the future until you start acknowledging Black and brown stories. And if you can't do that, then
right.
then your ability to empathize and understand is limited. And then you're only going to keep seeing, and you're only going to keep interpreting data in the exact same way. Then everything just becomes another self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. So, I mean, hearing stories of people of color, the intention really needs to be to figure out, like, have them help you figure out what the water is like around you, right? Like the nose blind things that we don't even understand are things. Like if you go into a conversation trying to prove your bias, kind of like what you're talking about, if you're going into a conversation trying to get a person of color to agree about the water, instead of you attempting to go like, what's the difference between whiteness and Blackness? What's the difference between whiteness and nativeness? And like, let me know what it is like to swim in in your body in this space, and take that. Not white people get very defensive then, right? Like we take everything very personally, and we want you to confirm what we know to be true. And it's important that as a white person you go, I need to understand your experience, and I need to come in a space of humility and a space of listening, because I mean, I am.
I would strongly urge, do research first.
Mm,
Start learning that research first, because coming in with any expectation that Black people have to heal from this sort of trauma and then coddle you through feeling bad about their trauma and then brainstorm with you about how to correct things that happen from, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of people that have done that thinking. There's a lot of Black intellectuals and brown and Black and immigrant and women and trans and queer, and I mean there are so many people that have already been vocal about these issues, that have already sort of laid out the keys towards dismantling white privilege, understanding it internally, understanding it, and then what are the steps to take to dismantle it. And I think that focusing on getting a hold of that research, getting a hold of those voices first, I think will save a lot of arguing in the long run. I think it will save a lot of heartbreak, and I think it will save a lot of people from re-traumatizing a group that now has to like start all over and convince you that what they're saying is true, when you haven't done the work of deconstructing the fact that I don't believe what these people are telling me, even though I'm telling myself that I'm listening.
Right. And so what you're
Yeah.
doing in that moment is you're saying to the person of color who is being vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
transparent and generous to you to share their story, you
Mm-hmm.
turn around and tell them, what you said to me isn't true and
Yeah.
is not valid."
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that to a book, it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt anybody. But if you do it
Exactly.
to your friend, you are
Yeah.
telling them that what they're saying about their own life doesn't match up with you, so they must be lying. And that
Mm-hmm.
is heart-wrenching for
Yeah.
people. And I
Yeah.
don't I don't have the perspective of a person of color, obviously, but like as a woman, when I
Mm-hmm.
have attempted, especially within the church, to work with men about what it's like to be a woman,
Yeah.
and they come back with 1,000 reasons why it's okay that the system is what it is,
Is
because
what
it's
it is.
really
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a double down, because not only was I real with you, but then when you come back and punish me for that, like it just
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah. You used it against
re-victimization.
me. You only
Yeah,
had to open up so that you could weaponize it and then shoot it right back at me. So then
right,
what's the point in me being honest? I might as well just tell you what I already know you want to hear. And how do I know
right,
you already want to hear that? Because there has been hundreds of years where people who look like me and darker have had to cater to what you want.
right, right.
So if anyone knows the white psyche, it's Black and brown people. If
Yeah,
anyone knows how white people work, it's brown and Black people.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy that like as soon as I start talking about the different holdups that I have, or different things that I'm discovering about myself and my own biases, like Black people are like,
Mhm.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because like you've had to work around those things your whole
Yeah.
life. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
such a good point. I
Yeah.
don't know if I've ever
Yeah.
considered that.
And not that I had to work around out of because I wanted to. It's not like I worked around it because I wanted to. I mean, there's that, there's, there's nuances to it because I care about you and we're friends and all this sort of stuff. But it's like, I have to do these things because my survival mechanisms kick in,
Right.
right? Because there is fear for my life that is backed up with a stack of bodies, as opposed to fear for white lives that pile of bodies is just, it's not that high. And the pile of bodies that is there, that as tragic as it is, because it shouldn't be there at all, I mean, in my personal opinion, the stack of bodies that is there is less to do with how they look and more to do with what they were doing, or those individual anomalies that everybody keeps talking about. So it's not because of, right, the color of their skin all of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the bodies are female in the white
Yeah.
community. Like
Yeah.
that's about
Right.
the only
Right.
place that gets to be that.
So then there's that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Danica, thank you so much for your time, honey. You are
Yeah.
amazing.
Thank
And
you
I
too.
just I so appreciate your wisdom, and I want to come back and revisit this for sure, and hear more.
Cool.
Can
Did you get the links I sent you?
um
All the J Smooth ones, and then I sent you a couple of other ones too.
yes. Okay. Well, no, I got the, let's see. I got the one from
Oh,
of the man that was
oh
killed.
no, this was the. I think I put this in the
Oh, in that big chain.
group.
Yes. Yes. I read
Yeah, I
through
think I
those.
put this one in the group.
So can you throw out, just for the end of this tape, again, we're talking to people where this is their first experience.
Yeah.
Where is a good place to dip your toe in? Maybe a few people to follow, maybe a few YouTube places to go, maybe a few books that would be good. Again, for people that don't have context, maybe.
I think, and this is a hard one because, well, I think the ones that I sent you is pretty much the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Um, let me see. Let me see what I do with my phone. Because I want people to find information that's accurate. I want people to find information that's real. But I want people to find information from people who are in the psychological, mental, emotional headspace to be able to be talking about this without sort of re-traumatizing themselves, because that happens even when people don't want to admit that it does. Okay, give me a second. Okay, TEDx has a lot of really good talks. There's one called Your Privilege is Showing by Lillian Medville. I don't know how to say her last name. Medville. Her name is Lillian. And then another one, Let's Get to the Root of Racial Injustice by Megan Ming Francis. That's another TEDx talk. Understanding My Privilege by Sue Borrego. That's a TEDx talk. And then I like Jay Smooth as well. He used to do, I think he does a lot more speaking engagements now, but he used to be really more active in like Facebook blogging and things like that. On Don Lemon, Race and Respectability is a good one. How to Tell Someone They Sound Racist, that's a really good one. But start with Jay Smooth, Moving the Race Conversation Forward, because it really sort of condenses everything we're talking about, because we're, there's that individual racism, that internalized one, then you have sort of these broader, social historical, events that not everyone is sort of on the same page is even real, right? There's not a lot of collective agreement on what has happened through time here. So he sort of breaks them down in different sorts of ways and provides data, provides receipts on why what we are talking about here is real. And it will be challenging for some, I imagine, to sort of take these as true or take these as real. But I can tell you, as especially as a woman of color, that I really like how he frames it. I like how he approaches it, and it's more or less, it's like, it's very soft, it's very gentle, it's very gently deconstructing, white privilege, which is okay. It's important that we are not all triggered all the time, because that, obviously is getting no one anywhere. But once you sort of go through that list, you'll find threads of videos and stuff, and I can certainly send you more stuff as they, as I find them. But yeah, I strongly recommend starting there with those ones, with the J Smooth, understand moving the race conversation forward, I say would be, out of all of them, watch that one first, because then you'll understand when we use the word racism or racist, or talking about race or or social injustice or all this sort of thing, you'll understand the complexities of everything, because like we said, you haven't had to know that. You haven't had to. There's been other people that already paved the way for you to not have to think about any of this. So now that you have to sort of dive in head first, right? I would start there, so then you can sort of see the layers of everything, and then understand, like, yes, you are responsible for your internalized thoughts, you're responsible for your interpersonal relationships, but it's understanding where you fit into the broader structural racism. That's sort of the big gap. That's really sort of the big gap to creating the kind of change that we need to stop people from being hunted down in the streets.
Yeah. So from that, I'm thinking about like our conversation, like the
Mm-hmm.
string from slavery to here. I
Mm-hmm.
know like 13th was a good one that I watched that really talked about like how that narrative of like the dangerous Black person came through. And it
Mm-hmm.
talks about the industrial complex of mass incarceration. It talks about a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other things that I know I've been learning about, like you had referenced like Black Wall Street,
Yeah.
redlining here in here in St. Paul. They took out a huge really productive Black community to put in I-94 in the
Yep.
50s, like
Yep.
all of the different things that happened in Jim Crow, like the era of lynchings.
Uh-huh.
So is there a space that would compile really good info on that, or books that you like from any of those where people can just kind of educate themselves historically?
Oh, okay. I would recommend let me pronounce her name correctly. I think her name is Jory DeGruy, but her book is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I encountered this book like about a decade ago, and I'm starting to see it resurface as though it's like a new book, but it's really not. It's
Mhm.
really, and there's it Joy DeGruy. So her last name is Degruy, Joy DeGruy, and she has talks on YouTube, but if you're looking for more something more in depth, I would strongly recommend that. Strongly recommend that. And the YouTube videos that I've seen, they sort of take the broader concepts of the book, where they go in depth in the book, and they sort of like kind of spoon feed, just different narratives, and so you sort of get, you're not going to go to one place and find how to just deconstruct white privilege 101. You have to consult all of the experts in this field, and there are many, because we all know, and so we've been writing about it and talking about this for hundreds of years, literally. And so yeah, post-traumatic slave syndrome, I would strongly, highly recommend that, because then she gets into more just the Western psychology understanding on what enslavement does to a person, just even just in a fraction of one single lifetime, let
Okay.
alone for hundreds of years.
Sure.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then the rippling of effects of that today. And I feel like that continuity that we were trying to discuss between the end of enslavement to like now, and the continuity and violence and resource extraction and capitalism and all of this sort of thing, she really dives into that. And she's a scholar. She's an academic scholar, so there's going to be receipts. You can check her references. You can look into that yourself if you have a hard time taking this person at their word, which is okay. It's good to do due diligence in your research. But she is very well researched, she's very highly educated, and she knows what she's talking about, and she provides those historical receipts. So she constructs a narrative in a way that sort of bridges that continuity in helping us understand why certain spaces and certain communities engage the world the way that they do. And a lot of this has to do, pretty much all of it, actually all of it, has to do with being conditioned to engage the world in this way and then being blamed for it.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm going to read that one. The one that would go to like what I was talking about with the water is called
Mhm.
White Fragility, and that's written by a white woman who's a
Mhm.
professor, and she she talks to white people like only white people can talk to white people,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's something. So um
I would also recommend anything by Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks in particular. That's another really good one.
Black skin, white mass. That's a
Mhm.
good. Okay.
And this is a little bit dated, right? So the psychology is a little bit dated, but Frantz Fanon really sort of laid the groundwork for especially Black intellectuals to understand um, the sort of psychoanalysis component. You know, he really sort of helped lay the groundwork for psychoanalysis of like dependency and inadequacy, right, in Black experiences, and where all of that comes from, and how, you know, sort of colonization just reinforces that. And as colonization changes and morphs and, you know, becomes more chameleonized, right, those behaviors are still there, the remnants of that are still there. And so again, this is I think, yeah, 1952, so it is dated, but it's still um would be a good bridge between what we're talking about now, especially with historical enslavement. The Frantz Fanon book is, because it's in the 50s, it's kind of coming right on the heels, like right on the surge of Black intellectualism, right?
Mhm.
And then you have from the 50s, you have sort of, you know, Western psychological understanding from the 50s today, which has really changed since Frantz Fanon's time. But because he's talking specifically about Blackness, a lot of what he's saying is still relevant, because even though he was educated more in Western psychology, which has changed radically from the 50s. It's only really changed radically from the 50s concerning psychoanalysis of white people. Black people getting a hold of this sort of thing already understood that. Remember what I was saying before? You know, no one really understands white people. You know, if anyone understands white people in the world, it's brown and Black people, because we've had to, because our survival and the survival of everyone that we've ever known ever depends on us knowing how these people think and how these people work. So again, there's already that backlog there for him. So the terminology and the phrasings may be a little bit outdated, but if you can sort of see through that and just sort of, extract like the meat and potatoes of what he's saying, it's a well worth read.
So is that book kind of in the space of like helping Black people deprogram from like the white
Yeah,
enculturing
yeah,
of slavery?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
In our next conversation, I've had some conversations with several people that are struggling with diversity of thought within Black people, like the idea that you can have Candace Owens and yourself and other people of color have completely different
Yeah, yeah.
takes and completely
Mhm,
different teachings,
mhm.
and the idea that I mean, you can look at certain people as sellouts or whatever else, but I think that some of that stuff of like there is an indoctrination,
Yes, yes.
there's a mental issue that comes with what happens.
Mhm.
Um,
And everyone breaks in different ways.
right,
Everyone breaks in different ways. And I mean, not everyone breaks in terms of, I hate all of this and I want to leave. Some people break in terms of, I really think I love this person.
right,
Some people have literally broken that way. And, each one is not more better than the other one. Each one has just been a mode of survival,
right,
just ensuring that you physically can wake up the next day.
right. And each one is used differently by the oppressive white
Yeah, yeah,
power
yeah.
to trip up the other, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so, yeah.
yep.
Okay, well, I would love to get into that next time, but it is almost
Yeah.
midnight and I am ready for bed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah.
I know that this is probably very exhausting, and I know that
Mhm.
it's coming on the heels of a really hard week. And so I just really appreciate your willingness to educate white people, and I want to acknowledge in this space that, like, you don't owe anybody that. And that is why I appreciate the generosity of it, because you've chosen to be so kind. And I love you, and you're amazing. And thank you for taking this time with me. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who, who may listen to this,
Yeah. 100%.
because it is important. It is. And if we can edit out, I forgot we were recording. If we could somehow edit out I said my brother's name.
Oh, yeah, at the beginning, all that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 There was a bunch of times where you got kind of garbled with your internet connection. So we'll have to see, like, where I need to edit to get some of that stuff to work.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but
Okay. Yeah, I kept seeing a flash on my thing, but I was like, well, sounds like you can still hear me. So
yeah,
let's do the
usually the audio worked, but the video would freeze. So, but
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
okay.
All right.
Well,
Well, I
thank you.
spoke with the last.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
All right.
Thank you so much. You
Yeah.
too.
Bye.